Thank you to my patrons. Your generosity and commitment to my work is astonishing. I sincerely appreciate it. If you'd like to see your name in the credits and gain access to a plethora of other perks, bonuses, and extras, please consider becoming a patron today. Simply click the link in the description below. Thank you. How dare you misrepresent Richard Dawkins in that way? He is totally free to be knocked sideways by a scientific discovery or by a microscopic insight without you trying to attach religious significance to it. These people are just rotten. Absolutely rotten.
If you ever try to bullshit me like that again, I will rip off your arms.
Hey everybody, Magic Skeptic here, and you're all very welcome to another episode of the most annoying religious people. Up for today is one Stephen Meyer of PragerU, who's going to tell us what's wrong with atheism. This one is spectacularly annoying, folks, but I guess if you clicked into this video with the thumbnail that it has, you are prepared for that. But were you prepared for this? Let's find out and dive right in.
3 major scientific discoveries contradict the expectations of scientific atheists and point instead in a distinctly God-friendly direction. First, the Big Bang. Discoveries in observational astronomy and developments in theoretical physics have revealed that the universe had a beginning. This is contrary to the expectation of scientific materialists who long portrayed the universe as eternal and self-existent, and therefore in no need of an external creator. This evidence for a beginning has instead confirmed the expectation of theists.
I'm sorry, but this is just misinformation. This isn't true. The idea that the Big Bang is the origin of all things, sometimes referred to as the cosmos, is not clear. The jury is out on that question. It could be the case that the past is infinite and that the Big Bang is just the beginning of our local spatio-temporal manifold.
You know, we say the universe began 13.8 billion years ago. So that's a measurement. So because we can measure the speed that all the galaxies are flying away from us, essentially. And then you can run time backwards, if you like, to find out when they were all on top of each other. And so it's quite a simple measurement, and we've done that. So we say the universe began 13.8 billion years ago. But actually, all we know really was the universe was very hot and very dense at that time. And we have some theories that the universe was in existence before that, and perhaps some sort of circumstantial evidence. And that means that actually the universe could have always been there, eternal.
It could be the case that we live in a multiverse, or that our universe has been birthed from a parent universe, thereby making our universe a daughter universe. And perhaps the answer as to whether or not there's a finite past or an infinite past will never be answerable because we're stuck hopelessly in our universe.
As brilliant as Einstein was, and as successful as his general theory of relativity has been, it has limits. And one limit is the center of a black hole, and another limit is the very birth of the universe itself. Getting back to your question, the Big Bang. So we have top people working on trying to resolve this singularity problem. And in so doing, you get to some ideas that, well, maybe our Big Bang, because the Big Bang is not going to go away. All the data support this. So now I've got this Big Bang thing, okay? And, well, is this embedded in something bigger? Ooh. So when you put like quantum physics and general relativity and you try to come up with some bigger understanding, deeper understanding, string theorists have been all into this, you get a multiverse. We didn't pull that out of our ass. That came out of the equations. So how old is the multiverse? I don't know. It's definitely older than our universe because it birthed our universe and it births other universes and it births, the way the equations drive it, an infinity of universes.
The truth is, nobody knows, and this guy doesn't know either. He's just asserting that he does. But if you just Google it, if you just pick up a rudimentary science textbook, you can learn what I've just said. When you pretend that the Big Bang is the origin of all things, you are revealing yourself to be either ignorant or dishonest. And I don't know what's worse.
Cosmological evidence has led other prominent scientists, including former MIT physicist Gerald Schroeder and the great Caltech astronomer Alan Sandage, to affirm a transcendent creator beyond space and time as the best explanation for the origin of our finite universe.
A quick side note, don't you just love the nonchalant manner in which theists utter the following phrase? The best explanation is a transcendent creator who exists beyond space and time. What the fuck does that mean? What does it mean to exist beyond space and time? Surely anything that exists has to be occupying some kind of space at some time. What is existence if not a unit of space-time? I mean, the idea that this is anything other than incoherent babble is bewildering to me. Now, some of you may be tempted to challenge me here and say, but Magic Skeptic, there are things which exist, and we know that they exist, despite the fact that they do not occupy space or time. So-called abstract objects like numbers, propositions, or the laws of logic, or what have you. But they don't stand in causal relations with anything. The number 7, for example, doesn't cause anything to happen. The laws of logic don't create universes, and so forth. So you cannot defend God with reference to abstract objects, because if God is an abstract object, well then God can't cause a universe to exist, because abstract objects don't cause things to happen, right? So this is an absolutely ridiculous defense if that's the road you want to go down. The key point is, if God exists in a so-called state of spacelessness and timelessness, yet stands in a causal relationship with the universe, that doesn't make sense. And if you're going to suggest that it makes sense, if you're going to assert that it makes sense, if you're going to say that this is the best explanation for the existence of the universe,
the best explanation for the origin of our finite universe,
well, then you're going to have to do some explaining. You cannot simply assert it and then appeal to abstract objects and think that your work is done. No, far from it. All of your work is ahead of you. So anyway, there's multiple layers of ridiculousness here. I just wanted to draw attention to this because I haven't in the past. I thought it might be worthy of just pausing here for a moment to illustrate why I think that this is a completely crazy idea that requires some justification other than a mere assertion. But let's continue.
Second, fine-tuning. We live in what Australian physicist Luke Barnes calls an extremely fortunate universe, where fundamental laws and physical parameters have somehow been fine-tuned with just the right strengths and values to make life possible. The incredible odds against this happening by chance has led even agnostic and atheistic physicists to marvel.
The very idea that you can calculate the odds is preposterous because we have a sample size of one universe. In order to be able to calculate the odds for anything, you have to be able to rerun the experiment, or at the very least, you need to be aware of all of the possible outcomes. If you can examine a die, you don't necessarily need to roll the die multiple times in order to calculate the probability, but this is assuming that you have full access to the die and you can examine all of its sides. In this way, you can calculate the probability of what the odds are of the number 1 coming up. It would be 1 in 6, of course. And then you can calculate the odds of 1 coming up twice in a row or 3 times in a row. Or if you throw a pair of dice, you can calculate the odds of getting 2 ones, snake eyes, or what have you. But you must have access to all of the variables. You must be able to see all sides of the die and have all of the information. Now, you could form a probabilistic picture with limited access to limited information. It's just the case that your information, your probabilities, and your calculations are going to have a margin of error depending on how ignorant you are. So that brings us to the universe. How ignorant are we about universes and how they form? In other words, what evidence is there that our universe is fine-tuned? Could it be the case, perchance, that universes always and inevitably emerge with precisely the physical parameters and properties that we see and observe in our local spatio-temporal manifold? Such a possibility hasn't been formally ruled out, nor could it be, because, need I remind you, we have a sample size of 1 universe. If we had access to multiple universes and we could compare and contrast, we might be in a better position to make grandiose declarations about fine-tuning and about the likelihood of a universe emerging with precisely the properties we observe. But alas, we are stuck hopelessly in our universe, and we don't even know for sure how our universe began, or if it even had a beginning. For all we know, universes always and inevitably emerge with precisely the boundary conditions and properties that we observe around us. Furthermore, it's entirely possible that life could have emerged even if those boundary conditions are movable and changeable, because there is no good or solid definition for what constitutes life. But don't take my word for it. Have a listen.
First, I am by no means convinced that there is a fine-tuning problem, and again, Dr. Craig offered no evidence for it. It is certainly true that if you change the parameters of nature, our local conditions that we observe around us would change by a lot. I grant that quickly. I do not grant that therefore life could not exist. I will start granting that once someone tells me the conditions under which life can exist. What is the definition of life, for example? If it's just information processing, thinking, or something like that, there's a huge panoply of possibilities.
I mean, we just know so little about what constitutes life and how it. I mean, we have the universe we have, and you could imagine fiddling with the numbers and making them. To what extent that freedom is even there, mathematically, isn't clear.
It looks like the constants in nature are fine-tuned for life to exist, but we don't know if another set of constants would allow another kind of life to exist, or we don't know enough. It's part of the problem of the anthropic principle. It's really a principle based on ignorance, not knowledge. It's based on saying, we don't know the answer. We don't know enough about the universe to know if there's a fundamental theory that says it has to be this way, or if these weird coincidences are there because we happen to be measuring them.
And one final point I want to draw your attention to. It seems to me that theists are having their cake and eating it too. Fine-tuning, after all, is the exact opposite of improbability. If a universe is fine-tuned by a god, well then one cannot claim simultaneously that said universe is improbable. For your god made it such that this universe was always and inevitably going to come about. Henceforth, it is not improbable. But let's just go ahead and assume that the theist can resolve this contradiction. And if you are a theist, please jump into the comments below and explain to me how you would do that. But even if you can resolve this alleged contradiction, fine-tuning is still a problem for the theistic worldview. For why would God have to fine-tune anything in the first place? For more on this, here's Sean Carroll once again.
God doesn't need to fine-tune anything. We talk about the parameters of physics and cosmology, the mass of the electron, the strength of gravity, and we say if they weren't the numbers that they were, then life itself could not exist. That really underestimates God by a lot, which is surprising from theists, I think. In theism, life is not purely physical. It's not purely a collection of atoms doing things like it is in naturalism. I would think that no matter what the atoms were doing, God could still create life. God doesn't care what the mass of the electron is. He can do what he wants. The only framework in which you can honestly say that the physical parameters of the universe must take on certain values in order for life to exist is naturalism.
These are gargantuan claims. They are writing checks that their asses cannot cash. And they should be called out on this. They should be held to account. This is bullshit.
Third, the complexity of life. Molecular biology has revealed the presence in living cells of an exquisite world of informational nanotechnology.
Equivocation, equivocation, equivocation. How is he equivocating here? Well, if you refer to what's going on in living cells as informational nanotechnology, what you're doing is appealing to your listeners' intuitions about actual nanotechnology, about actual technology, which we know is built by intelligent agents. Human beings build technology, and we do so with foresight and skill and blueprints and so on. With that acknowledged, PragerU co-opts this language in order to massage your intuitions in the direction of the conclusion they want you to accept. That is, that a God is responsible for creating yourself, creating human biology, creating cells, and so on. But just remember, this is just equivocation. Calling it technology doesn't make it technology. Referring to it as nanotechnology doesn't make it so. These words are being co-opted in order to smuggle in notions of design before they've ever put any evidence on the table at all. But with that equivocation acknowledged, let's proceed and see where they go with this.
Digital code in DNA and RNA, tiny, intricately constructed molecular machines, a complex information storage, transmission, and processing system that resembles but vastly exceeds our most advanced digital high technology.
So we know that codes are designed by coders. Coders are intelligent human beings with agency and foresight who code things. Machines are things that are built by human beings. Again, agents creating things. Using these words doesn't mean that you're right. Calling the information that's in DNA a code doesn't mean that there's a coder.
Is the genetic code really a code?
It is a code, it's definitely a code, and it is a code that's put together not by a designer, but by natural selection. It's very easy to see how that can happen in principle.
It's just biology, folks. By way of analogy, it would be like referring to your elbow joint as a hinge and then concluding that you must have been assembled in a factory because hinges are things that are parts of doors and doors and hinges are assembled in factories. Now, I'm aware that this analogy doesn't work perfectly because at the end of the day, PragerU does believe that human beings were assembled in, metaphorically speaking, God's factory. But I think you and I know better.
When you drop a stone, it falls to the ground, and you as a scientist will explain that by gravity. You wouldn't dream of saying, oh, there must be a God pushing it down. That's exactly what you're in effect saying with respect to evolution.
No agency involved, no conscious guide other than the guide, very specific guide, that is natural selection, contrary to another popular theistic claim. Randomness didn't produce us. The mutations are random, but natural selection is not. Natural selection selects for that which is good enough to survive. It doesn't have to be the best at surviving, contrary to another popular myth. When it selects for something, it just has to be good enough, which probably goes a long way towards explaining how idiots like the guy in this video are still breathing. But there you go, folks. Let's proceed.
Not what anyone would expect to see as the result of blind, materialistic processes. Dawkins himself may have conceded as much when he recently confessed to being knocked sideways with wonder at the miniaturized intricacy of the data processing machinery in the living cell.
To pretend that such a quote is evidence of Dawkins conceding ground in favor of the idea that there might be a designer is just plain dishonest.
Not what anyone would expect to see as the result of blind, materialistic processes. Dawkins himself may have conceded as much.
It's absolutely ridiculous. If anybody reads Dawkins or anybody who's ever watched him speak on stage or what have you, you'll know that the man is filled with awe when it comes to the natural world and the wonders that are contained therein. I mean, you felt this too, dear listener. If you climb a majestic mountain and you reach the peak and you look at the world from that bird's eye view, it's hard not to feel a sense of splendor. It's hard not to feel a sense of awe. Nature can be quite beautiful. A stunning sunset, for example. But going all the way down to the microscopic and seeing the wonders of the quantum world, if you want to go that far, right? Or just looking at the inside of a cell. These things can produce feelings of wonder as well. None of this is a concession in the direction of God or a designer. And to suggest otherwise is frankly lies. You fucking liar. How dare you misrepresent Richard Dawkins in that way? He is totally free to be knocked sideways by a scientific discovery or by a microscopic insight without you trying to attach religious significance to it. These people are just rotten. Absolutely rotten.
So what should we make of all this? For their part, scientific atheists have constructed ever more convoluted and fanciful theories.
Scientific atheists, whatever the hell that means. Well, apparently those despicable scientific atheists have constructed what he calls convoluted and fanciful theories. Not quite. No, what they've done is follow the evidence where it leads. They've put in the hard work and they've looked at the evidence and they've spent years and years and years, decades of researching these things in order to inch forwards, in order to, reduce our ignorance. They don't just reassert their positions again and again and again. That's the difference between science and faith. Science updates in the presence of new data, new information, whereas people like this guy will continue to spout the same old nonsense until he dies.
They posit alien designers to account for the code of life.
He is either intentionally or mistakenly conflating a hypothesis with a scientific theory, the latter of which is a great honour, a label that is bestowed upon ideas that survive a rigorous process of falsification and emerge out the other end supported by a strong body of evidence. This idea that life was seeded on Earth, otherwise known as directed panspermia, was originally proposed by Francis Crick and Leslie Orgel, both of whom self-described this hypothesis as a, and I quote, bold speculation. This idea is not ascendant in the scientific community. It is a hypothesis and nothing more. So to use this as evidence that the scientific community is willing to believe fanciful ideas or to believe in the irrational is just plain dishonest.
Scientific atheists have constructed ever more convoluted and fanciful theories.
This is just a hypothesis, not an ascendant scientific theory. The difference is crucial. So, with that acknowledged, let's move on.
They posit multiple parallel universes to try to explain fine-tuning.
The multiverse isn't a hypothesis that was arrived at in order to try and explain fine-tuning. Isn't that just so wonderful when Christians assume that the world revolves around them? He has this idea in his head that scientists in their laboratories are quickly sketching down ideas and desperately clutching at straws because of the fine-tuning argument.
They posit multiple parallel universes to try to explain fine-tuning.
That's not what's going on in science laboratories. It has nothing to do with you and your fine-tuning argument. The multiverse hypothesis has been arrived at through research and through the math. That is what the math predicts. It doesn't mean that it's true. The jury is out. Maybe there's a multiverse or maybe there isn't.
So when you put like quantum physics and general relativity and you try to come up with some bigger understanding, deeper understanding, string theorists have been all into this, you get a multiverse. We didn't pull that out of our ass. That came out of the equations.
There is evidence riding on the matter, and some of that evidence points in the direction of a multiverse. That's why the multiverse hypothesis exists, not as a desperate straw-clutching attempt to resist the fine-tuning argument, you idiot. Oh, brother.
And they've developed elaborate mathematical equations in an attempt to use physics to show how the universe could have begun from nothing physical.
Do any of you sense the subtle insult riding beneath the surface with this last comment? They've developed elaborate mathematics, as though the scientists are trying to bamboozle us with elaborate, convoluted ideas and theories in order to pull the wool over our eyes and convince us that God doesn't exist. It's just a conspiracy theory at this point. The entire scientific community is involved in a conspiracy to resist PragerU, As soon as they put out a fine-tuning video, scientists are quickly clutching at straws in their laboratories trying to come up with alternative hypotheses in order to convince the world of the truth of atheism. And they come up with elaborate equations to bamboozle the public. Oh my God, I mean, this guy just sounds like a nutcase. Am I wrong, dear listener? Or does he just sound like a nutcase? Anyway, let's get to the end of this. Christ, how long is left? Oh, talk about suffering. Everybody's got their cross to bear, folks. How Christ-like am I? Bearing my suffering in a noble fashion, carrying that cross just for you. You know it. I've got your back.
But what if the scientific atheists are just wrong? What if the universe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is an intelligent and purposeful creator behind it all? In my book, Return of the God Hypothesis, I argue that the universe has precisely such properties. And that raises a hopeful possibility.
A hopeful possibility, you say? Ah! Oh my God! Ah! Oh, make it stop! Ah! 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 Although I'd rather that than read his fucking book.